Hello and welcome back. This chapter continues on themes from the last lecture when we talked about neurons in the nervous system. This chapter will focus on the endocrine system and how it works together with the nervous system. We will end the lecture by going over a few hormones that are secreted by the endocrine system. So let's jump in and get started. Nerve and endocrine cells are specialized for control and coordination by the body. Endocrine cells secrete hormones into the blood. Nerve and endocrine cells work together to ensure that everyday operations of the animal's bodies are met. Nerve and endocrine cells need to communicate with other cells. Most intercellular communication takes place by chemical signals that travel to a target cell. The signal molecule binds to a receptor on the target cell, which then will initiate a response. Figure 35.1 illustrates both nerve and hormone cells. Nerve cells, as we saw last chapter, use neurotransmitter molecules to send to a target cell, while endocrine cells use hormones to send to other cells. Nervous control, as we saw last chapter, is very fast. Nerve impulses need to travel fast and quickly. They are also addressed. This means that they are delivered to highly defined target cells. Endocrine control, on the other hand, compared to nervous control, is rather slow. Hormones must travel to the target in the blood. Hormones may stay in the blood a long time, and they are often used to alter gene expression. Endocrine control is also said to be broadcasted, meaning that all cells are potentially exposed to the hormone. The nervous and endocrine systems control different functions. Nervous system controls movement of skeletal muscles, such as moving or playing a sport, while the endocrine system controls prolonged activities, such as adolescent development. The nervous system and endocrine system do need to work closely together, however. Examples of this are when the brain controls secretions of many hormones. Likewise, sex hormones affect brain development during puberty. Animals use chemical signaling over a broad range of spatial scales. Paracrines are chemicals secreted by one cell that affect neighboring cells. Autocrines are chemicals secreted into intercellular fluid that diffuse to receptors on that very same cell. And hormones are signals that are carried throughout the body by blood circulation. Other signals that are also used by cells are neurotransmitters. These move across the synaptic cleft, and secretion may be controlled by impulses that originate far from the site of release. Pheromones are released into the environment and can affect other individuals. Figure 35.2 shows the different types of signaling that occurs within animals. And as we talked about earlier, these signals cover a variety of spatial scales. Okay, here's our first progress check. Take your time with these questions and move on whenever you're ready. There are two types of glands that our bodies use to excrete substances. One is an exocrine gland, and the other is an endocrine gland. An exocrine gland secretes substances into a duct, or body cavity. For example of this would be the mammary gland, which is used to excrete milk, or the salivary glands, which are used to secrete saliva. Hormones are chemical substances secreted into the blood by endocrine cells. Hormones are used to regulate the functions of other cells. Hormones also act in very low concentrations within the blood. And hormones also bind to cells by means of protein receptors found within the cells or on the cells, which makes them specific for a particular type of target cell. Neurosecretory cells are cells that resemble neurons. These are excitable cells that propagate action potentials like a neuron. Their cell bodies are in the central nervous system, with the axon terminals releasing hormones with what are called neural humoral organs. These neurosecretory cells provide a direct interface between the nervous and endocrine system. An example of a neurohormone that is produced by a neurosecretory cell is oxytocin. Figure 35.3 shows the two types of endocrine cells. Top illustrates a neurosecretory cell that produces a neurohormone by an action potential. The signal comes from the central nervous system. This neurohormone enters a capillary and travels to the target cell. The bottom shows a non-neural endocrine cell that releases its hormone into the blood vessel without the action potential. Non-neural endocrine cells are not excitable. They are typically stimulated to secrete a hormone by other hormones. For example, hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary gland help regulate the thyroid gland. Hormones can be classified into three groups. The first is peptide and protein hormones. These hormones are water-soluble and are easily transported in the blood. They are packaged in vesicles and released into blood by exocytosis. They cannot cross cell membranes by themselves, so the receptors for these hormones are on the outside of the target cell. Insulin and growth hormones are both examples of peptide hormones. The other two groups of hormones are steroid and amine hormones. Steroids are synthesized from cholesterol. They are lipid-soluble and bind to carrier proteins in the blood. The receptors for steroids are found inside the target cells. Amine hormones are modified amino acids. They may be lipid or water-soluble based off their structure. The receptors for amine hormones may be on the inside or outside of the target cell, depending on their solubility. Here are some examples of steroid hormones. Cortisol, aldosterone, and testosterone and estradiol are all steroids. Remember, steroids are lipid-soluble, with the cell receptor found inside the target cell. Here are two examples of amine hormones, epinephrine and thyroxine. They are composed of amino acids. Amine hormones may or may not be soluble in water or lipids, depending on their solubility. When the hormone is released, it needs to bind to its target cell. Depending on the type of hormone, the receptors may be on the outside or inside of the target cell. Peptide and protein hormones have their target cell receptors on the outside of the cell membrane. Steroid and some amine hormones have their receptors on the inside of the cells. Lipid-soluble hormones can diffuse through the cell membrane. The receptors for these hormones are found within the cytoplasm. Once they bind, this hormone receptor complex moves into the nucleus and can alter gene expression. An example of this is the testosterone receptor complex, which activates transcription of genes which increase muscle mass. Target cells have receptors for more than one hormone. Negative or positive feedback can influence the number of receptor proteins per cell. For example, in type 2 diabetes mellitus, high levels of insulin can lead to a decrease in the production of insulin receptors throughout the body, and as a result, cells become less sensitive to insulin. One hormone can have different effects on different types of cells. The function of some hormones have changed over time due to evolution. For instance, prolactin has been found in all vertebrate phyla, but has different functions. It stimulates milk production in mammals and stimulates nest building within birds. Because target cells have different receptor systems, one hormone can elicit different responses from different target cells. In the fight or flight response, the adrenal medullary glands secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine depending on the signal they receive. The adrenal gland sits above each kidney. There's an outer and inner cortex within the gland that produces different hormones, depending on the signal they receive. Because hormones can elicit different responses on different target cells, they can bring about a range of responses such as faster and stronger heartbeat. They can also bring about constriction of skin blood vessels. They can be used in the dilation of skeletal muscle blood vessels. They can be used in the breakdown of glycogen in the liver, and send signals to decrease blood flow and secretion of the digestive enzymes within the gut. The timing of hormone release varies. Peptide hormones are synthesized prior to use and stored and can be released quickly. Steroid hormones are usually synthesized on demand and their secretion is relatively slow. Hormones must be removed from the blood. Organs such as the liver and kidneys can degrade hormones by enzymes, or the hormones may be excreted. Alright, feels like forever since we've had a progress check. Please take your time to answer these questions and continue with the lecture when ready. Next, we're going to look at the pituitary gland, which is very vital to the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is also referred to as the master gland. It secretes hormones that control many other glands. The pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus of the brain. And within the pituitary gland, there are two regions, the anterior and posterior pituitary. Here's a diagram of the pituitary gland with the anterior and posterior regions highlighted. The pituitary gland, as mentioned before, is attached to the hypothalamus of the brain. Posterior pituitary is an extension of the brain. The hormones synthesized and secreted by the posterior pituitary gland are secreted by brain neurosecretory cells. Remember from before, these are cells that have action potential. The cell bodies are found within the hypothalamus, axons extending into the posterior pituitary. This combination forms a neurohemal organ. The hypothalamus secretes two peptide hormones into the posterior pituitary. The first is called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, and the other hormone is oxytocin. ADH controls water extraction by the kidneys, and oxytocin stimulates uterine contraction during birth and milk flow from the breasts. The brain controls these secretions by action potential signals. This diagram shows what part of the pituitary, anterior or posterior, and what hormone they secrete that affect target cells. As you can see, the pituitary gland affects many parts of the body. The anterior pituitary gland is an endocrine gland. It does not rely on neurosecretory cells like the posterior pituitary. Hormones here are synthesized by non-neural endocrine cells. The anterior pituitary gland produces what are called tropic hormones. Tropic hormones are hormones that target other endocrine glands. The anterior pituitary gland produces 4 tropic hormones. First is adrenocorticotropin, or ACTH for short. This controls the adrenal cortex of the adrenal gland. The other is thyroid-stimulating hormone, or more commonly referred to as TSH, which controls the thyroid gland. The next tropic hormone is called luteinizing hormone, or LH, and follicle-stimulating hormone, or more commonly referred to as FSH. Both of these hormones are gonadotropins, meaning they control the gonads, ovaries, and testes. Here's a table of the hormones produced by the posterior and anterior pituitary glands. This is a good review of what hormones we have won over. Finally, our last progress check. Please take your time to answer these questions. As always, let me know if something isn't clear or doesn't make sense. Thank you for listening, and have a good rest of your day.